It's UofL Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. We're glad you're joining us today. We often say at the top of this program that you're going to be a little bit smarter after the 30 minutes that you've listened to this program than you are right now. So hopefully that'll be the case, and you'll learn a little bit about the University of Louisville, the great research, the faculty members, the students that we've got at the University of Louisville, and you'll learn all sorts of neat stuff about UofL as we go along with the program. So what do we got coming up today? Well, coming up a little later in the show, the psychological toll of racism, the effects of PTSD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, all those kinds of mental health issues will be fair game for the head of the Center for Mental Health Disparities at UofL. We'll be talking to her. But first, most of you who listen to 93.9 The Ville are guys, and many of you are fathers. Fathers have unique challenges, hang-ups, pressures, and opportunities. Arman Perry is a professor in the Kent School of Social Work who's doing research on issues involving fathers. Arman, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Glad you're here. All right. So what kind of research do you do on fathers? How'd you get, I guess we ought to start with, how'd you even get interested in that field of studying fathers?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. By trade, I'm a social worker. And in Montgomery, Alabama, where I used to live, I was a foster care social worker. I worked with kids who the state determined that they didn't have parents either willing or able to take care of them. One of the things that I noticed kind of sort of anecdotally was that we didn't do enough, at least in my opinion, to reach out to the dads of the kids that were on our caseloads. And as a consequence, we had kids coming into care, and some kids ended up being adopted, and we had done very little, if anything, to reach out to not only their dads, but their entire paternal side of their families. And I saw that as troublesome or problematic, and so that's what led me to go back to graduate school to pursue an academic career focused on dads and their involvement with their kids.
So what are you looking at with dads? I mean, from your perspective as a faculty member in the Kent School, what are you looking at?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. First, I'm looking at the predictors of father's involvement. So what are the types of traits, qualities, and attributes that are internal to men and also external to their environments that put them in position to take active roles in their children's lives, right? Things like whether or not they're married, things like whether or not they have stable employment, things like whether or not their gender identity suggests to them that taking an active, nurturing, kind of sort of caregiving role in their children's life, is that something that kind of sort of resonates with them? Does that fit who they are as people? In addition to those predictors of father's involvement, I'm also working with a number of human service and social service agencies in and around town to help them develop strategies and techniques to better engage men in the work that they're doing.
I mean, we always hear about the single-parent families, and the fathers are just not active in their kids' lives, a lot of them. Is that really what you're focusing on, is trying to get those dads reactivated in their kids' lives, or just give them the fathers that want to be active in their kids' lives to reactivate them?
Yes, right. So,
okay.
And so my all of my research suggests to me that what's really, really important for individual families is that the mothers of children and the fathers of children somehow get together and develop a plan for their family. That plan is not going to look the same for every single person, right? So certainly I'm in no position to suggest a cookie-cutter approach, but more than anything else, what my research attempts to do is to position men to develop the types of infrastructure, capacity, wherewithal, knowledge, and skills so that if and when there's a space for them to take a more active role, then they have the ability to step into that space and do it.
All right, maybe we ought to back up for just a little minute. We're going to talk about your big grant that you just received here in a minute, but you said you were a caseworker in Alabama, correct?
Right.
So what kind of cases did you see on the ground every day that led you to believe that fathers need better tools, or we need to at least study this phenomenon of how fathers fit into their kids' lives and what they can do to be better fathers?
So I think in many ways it starts at intake, right? So stereotypically what happens is if there's an allegation of either abuse or neglect, someone calls their local CPS agency. And from that point, an investigation is conducted, and if that investigation is substantiated, then there's a determination made that the child has either been abused or neglected. And so what we saw time and time again is that when kids came into care after those investigations had been conducted, disproportionately, there was no information provided to us on the fathers, right? In some instances, in some cases, the mothers of the children or the caregivers of the children said that they didn't even know who the child's fathers were, right? And so many of the kids that I work with, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, because I did what we called independent living. So we were working with kids who they were most likely not going to be adopted because they were teenagers, but they also didn't have families ready to kind of sort of take them back. And so my job was basically to get them ready for the day that the state of Alabama would emancipate them. And so anyway, over and over again, kids as old as 13, 14, 15, 16 years old would tell me that not only did they not have a relationship with their father, but some of the kids never even knew their fathers, right? So in terms of like where does this kind of sort of work fit in, some of it is kind of sort of right there on the ground, making sure that agencies that provide services to families, that they know who dads are, right? So whatever roles dad may be able to take in their children's lives, they actually have a way to kind of sort of contact them and help them in terms of the services that they provide. So some of this is really, really basic in terms of just reaching out to dads, because my experience tells me that oftentimes in the world of human and social services, the word family is really code for moms and children, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to change that narrative. So if I could just give you a quick tagline and just kind of sort of give you a running theme that permeates my work, is about kind of sort of making sure that when we say the word family, we're being more inclusive and we're thinking about dads as well.
We're talking about fathers. All right, we're talking with Arman Perry, who is with the Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville and does research on fathers and how they fit into their kids' lives. So you did get a big grant recently. Tell us about that.
Sure. So I guess it was back in October, we got the word from the Department of Health and Human Services that we were awarded with $4.9 million. And basically what our project does is we reach out to non-custodial dads, and we're doing that in 6 counties. So we will be doing that starting in July in 6 counties: Jefferson County, Davis County, Owen County, Elliott County, McCracken County, and I don't know if that's 5 or 6, I think, and Hardin County. There we go. And so we're going to be in all of those 6 counties, and obviously the surrounding counties as well, recruiting non-custodial dads into a program that we call For Your Child. And what we'll be doing is we'll be offering them a combination of responsible fatherhood education, so parenting education that's specific to fatherhood. We're also going to be providing them with co-parenting education, trying to put them in position to develop the types of skills and resources that they can develop more amicable and effective co-parenting relationships with their children's mothers. And then beyond that, we're also going to be providing guys with economic self-sufficiency case management. So more than anything else, if guys have a job, they want to try to help them get a better job. If they don't have a job, obviously we want to get them connected to the labor market, so as to position them to take on the kind of sort of socially prescribed roles that society says dads need to fill. But in addition to that, also providing them with the skills and the tools and the resources so they can take on more non-traditional roles as it relates to nurturing and caregiving.
Do you see, and do you think you'll see as part of this grant, that you may have trouble recruiting some fathers who are the non-custodial parent saying, look, I only get my kid on weekends, a couple of weekends a month. Why should I go through these classes? Why should I do all this stuff when I'm only getting to spend, maybe 40 hours a month with my kid? Why should I do all this?
Absolutely, we expect that and we anticipate that. But I worked with a guy once who said nothing beats a failure but a try, right? And also grew up playing Little League Baseball, and the coach told me, he says, Perry, swing hard just in case you hit it, right? And so to my way of thinking, family is the primary institution in society, right? And also to my way of thinking, the role of dads is the most significant barrier facing the kind of sort of improvement of American families, and everything else pales in comparison. And so under the auspices of swing hard just in case you hit it, that's where we're aiming. But to your point, we certainly expect to bump up against barriers and obstacles. But we have a number of strategies, and we're really, really versed in the literature to kind of sort of determine ways to come up to mitigate some of those barriers and challenges as well.
You talked about how important it is that fathers be in kids' lives. Mm-hmm. What, from your research and other research, have you found the 15-year-old child who never had a dad in their life mm-hmm. versus the 15-year-old kid who dad's there every night mm-hmm. when they come home from school? What's the difference by the time that 15-year-old hits that age? Yeah,
so generally speaking, obviously this isn't applicable to every single 15-year-old kid, but generally speaking, what the research suggests is that children who have fathers who take an active role in their lives, those children are less likely to suffer from mental health concerns. Those children are much more likely to achieve at a high rate in school. Those children are at a significantly reduced rate of juvenile delinquency, teenage pregnancy, and the list goes on, right? So there are a number of different ways that dad's role and dad's presence and dad's involvement in the lives of their children makes a significant and positive impact on the lived experiences of their children.
And as part of this grant that you received, that you're going into these 6 counties looking for dads to try and give them a hand up, some tools to be better dads, what is an actual one of the tools that you're going to be trying to give them to become better fathers? I mean, what's a practical thing that you'll be trying to teach them?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. So I mentioned the responsible fatherhood curriculum, and we also mentioned that there's a co-parenting curriculum as well. And so one of the things that we'll be doing on the co-parenting side is we'll be teaching men effective communication skills, right? So one of the issues, and if people out there have been in relationships, they can probably attest to this fact that sometimes when your relationship becomes toxic, people receive and filter everything that you say through the lens of that toxic relationship. So one of the things that happens sometimes with moms and dads, particularly moms and dads who are no longer romantically involved, is that dad may be saying one thing, mom may be saying one thing. They may indeed be saying the same thing, but because of the ways in which they receive each other, they take everything negatively, and everything is viewed through this kind of sort of negative lens. So just as a real small practical sort of a thing, one of the things we'll be doing is we'll be teaching dads to use what we call I messages. So if you and I are involved in a discussion and you do something or you say something that makes me upset or angry, rather than saying, hey, Mark, I hate it when you, right, what I'll say is, Mark, from time to time, I feel as though you don't understand my perspective, right? So what that does is it decreases the opportunity for you to get defensive because I'm not blaming you, right? Rather, what I'm doing is I'm trying to give you some sense and some insight into how whatever it is that you may or may not have done has made me feel, right? And so the defensiveness tends to decrease, and it can open the door for some more effective communication. So that's just an example of the types of things that we'll be doing.
And what do you hope to find after you've done research on some fathers and given them some tools out in these 6 counties? What do you hope that your study will show and your research will show?
Yeah, so we're looking at a number of outcomes, and as a part of our evaluation plan, we're going to have pre and post data collection, 3 months follow-up, and also 6 months follow-up. So long story short, what we'll be looking to do to see if dads have increases in their parenting knowledge and their parenting skills and their co-parenting relationship quality, as well as their actual involvement with their children. And what we'll be looking to do is see if whether or not those things stick 6 months after their participation in the program is over.
All right. A couple other things. We're about ready to wrap up here, but a couple of things. How many children out there, not just in Kentucky, but let's do a national number here. How many children don't have a father in their life, or either don't know who they are, or the dad just doesn't spend hardly any time to them?
Yeah, and so just to kind of sort of speak to that, now it's tough to say whether or not children know who their dad is or whether or not dad is in their life, but the data that we have in terms of dad's resident status, how many children live in the same home with their dads, we know that nationally, 1 out of 3 children live in homes where their father does not co-reside with them. And when we're talking about racial and ethnic minorities, particularly African Americans, we know that number is about 2 out of 3. So close to 66% of African American children at some point in their childhood will live apart from their dad.
And what message would you have to those dads who are no longer part of their kids' lives? As a social worker and a former person who dealt with these cases.
Yeah, so a number of messages. First, I would say stay encouraged. Know that your role in your children's life is unique and irreplaceable. Right? No one else can do what you do, and if you aren't doing it, then you can't guarantee that anyone else will. And if and when you find yourself in a position where you're struggling to find your place as a dad, go against the grain, go against what is stereotypically male, and ask for help, right? Find folks like us. We're here, we're waiting, we're ready.
Okay. All right. Arman Perry from the Kent School of Social Work. Thanks so much for being on the program.
Absolutely.
Hope the study goes well. Starts in July, right?
Starts in July.
Okay. Very good. All right. When we come back, we'll talk about a host of mental health issues like PTSD and obsessive-compulsive disorder and whether racism has a psychological toll. You're listening to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville.
This is our time to soar. We are an unstoppable force of innovation and academic excellence, solving the world's mysteries through research, stimulating growth in our community and beyond, and inspiring the next generation of leaders to build a better future for all of us. We are the University of Louisville. Watch us take flight.
Welcome back to UofL Today with Mark Hebert. Monnica Williams is a professor of psychology who directs the Center for Mental Health Disparities at UofL. Welcome, Monnica.
Thank you.
And I already promoted you that we're going to talk about a host of mental health issues. So,
excellent.
Is that okay?
Wonderful.
All right, we'll tackle a bunch of things here. Well, you have recently done some research and been quoted in some media talking about racism's impact on the mental health of African Americans and others. What was that research, and what have you found?
Well, what we're finding is that African Americans are impacted by racism in ways that we didn't even consider 20 years ago. So over the last 15 years, there's been a lot of new research showing the connection between racism and all sorts of mental health problems such as anxiety, depression, trauma, substance abuse, and even psychosis.
Really? And just in African Americans, or is that in Hispanics and others that
any stigmatized minority, really. But it does seem that African Americans receive the brunt of it. They receive the worst discrimination compared to other groups, although certainly these other groups are receiving more than their fair share as well.
So when you talk about all those mental health issues, how does it impact the daily lives of some African Americans who feel that they've been dealt, with some racist nature?
Right. Well, one of the things that I've seen a lot of is African Americans basically having a meltdown when having to confront law enforcement, even for minor things, because of either a history of harassment in terms of their own experiences or seeing things on television like unarmed black men being shot. This raises the level of fear and anxiety in many African Americans so that then when they're confronted with these situations, they perceive danger that may not be there.
So I'm sure you've seen some folks say, well, that's just an excuse to act out and to be angry and to have bad behavior. But what you're saying is that could be a real psychological thing that happens with African Americans when they react in those situations, correct?
Absolutely. And I've done evaluations on many African Americans in such situations, and in almost every single case, they've had symptoms of PTSD.
Really? Mm-hmm. So when I think of PTSD, I'm thinking of soldiers coming back from Iraq.
Right.
You're saying PTSD is what then?
I'm saying the same sort of reactions that you would see, say, from a veteran who comes back and sees a helicopter and freaks out and hides under the desk. We're seeing the same sort of reactions in African Americans who may be confronted by law enforcement, having that fast beating heart, feeling anxious, feeling sweaty, feeling very frightened about what might happen. That's one example. And so you can really see the parallel in the symptoms.
And how does that manifest itself? I mean, the African Americans act out and get real angry at cops. Is that some of the, in your mind, some of the problems we're having between the black protesters and black folks on the street who are getting shot by these cops who say, I was justified, this guy was acting up, he came at me, he was angry, and, African Americans are saying, well, wait a minute, this, something else was going on here.
Right.
Is that a piece of it?
That could be a piece of it, but sometimes they may react in anger, sometimes they may be frightened, sometimes they may be paralyzed, sometimes they may freak out and run, and then the policeman's like, oh, he ran, I shot him. So people react to trauma in a lot of different ways, but usually they're more likely to flee.
Mm-hmm. Have there been any studies or anything like that at UofL that have been done on that, or are you taking research that's been done elsewhere and kind of applying it in your field?
Right. So this is research that I'm in the process of doing right now, actually. I've developed a measure for assessing race-based trauma in African Americans, and right now I'm in the process of piloting that measure to see how well it captures the symptoms in African Americans who are suffering like this.
All right, you're gonna have to explain that a little more to me. So in common man's lingo, what does that mean? What are you trying to figure out?
Right. So we're trying to figure out what sorts of experiences have basically led up to the point where the person feels all of this fear and trauma and anxiety. So we're looking at the history of racism that people experience at an individual level and at a community level and at a cultural level and at a historical level. So there's all these layers of trauma which are contributing to the symptoms we're seeing.
most folks, I think, including most African Americans, would say things have really improved in this country over the last 50 years. Yeah, there's still instances of racism, but on a daily basis, it doesn't happen, out there to African Americans, Hispanics, others, racial minorities. What would you say?
I would say it's easy to say that when it doesn't happen to you, but I would say just turn on the news and look at all the unarmed black men who've been shot. There it is right there. Not to mention that the face of racism has changed a bit since the civil rights movement. It used to be okay to say, I don't like that guy because he's black. People don't say that anymore, but they still act in the same racist ways, even though they're not admitting to why they're behaving that way. And so a lot of young people coming up today, they've been fed the idea that racism is mostly a thing of the past. But then as they start to encounter people who treat them badly, they have to come up with an explanation or an understanding for why this is happening. And so what you often see then is young people of color recognizing that racism is a lot worse than they thought it was, and then sometimes even low self-esteem as they don't understand what the cause is for the way they're treated.
We're talking with Monnica Williams, who's a professor of psychology at the University of Louisville and directs the Center for Mental Health Disparities at UofL. Mental health disparities, what does that mean? How'd you come up with that title?
Well, mental health disparities, basically a disparity is when one population or condition is not getting as much recognition, treatment, resources as another condition or population. And so one of the things we're really interested in is how certain groups, such as underrepresented minorities, are maybe not having the same access to treatment, or if they do have the same access, not the same outcomes. So they may not get, the treatment may not be delivered in the best way for them. And so this is what we want to understand.
Is that a bigger picture thing, though, that health insurance and health coverage, the poor, underrepresented, generally don't have as much as you and I might have? Is that a bigger picture than what race you are?
That's a big piece of it, and certainly, and those two things are not independent either.
Right,
Race and income are correlated, but it's not simply an economic issue. We know that that's some of it, but also we know that when a person of color goes in to see the doctor, the doctor's not going to spend as much time with them. They're not going to get as good advice. They may not get the most current treatments, all other things being equal. And so then these things lead to differences in outcomes. And also minorities have more mistrust of the medical establishment in general and may not seek care when they need it and then show up in ERs.
That was one question I was going to ask. You just answered it. The other part of that question is, are African Americans, especially African American males, more the tough guys? I'm the macho guy. I don't need to go see the doctor. I don't need to go see a mental health professional.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and we see that in males in every group.
Well, we're all like that. All of us guys are like that. We don't like to go to the doctor. We're tough. But
yeah.
Is it more prevalent in African American males?
Oh, absolutely. They feel like they have to put up this front. We call it the cool pose, where they silence who they are and put on this tough exterior of some sort of manhood that shows that they can't be ruffled by no matter what happens to them.
Okay. I also want to talk to you a little bit about obsessive compulsive disorder. What is that?
Obsessive compulsive disorder. So that's a good question. A lot of people think that means you arrange your shoes by color or alphabetize your soup cans, but it's actually a debilitating disorder. It's not a personality quirk. It's a serious mental illness.
So what is it? If I'm obsessive compulsive, what might I do?
Well, one of the most common manifestation is fears of germs or contamination. So,
like Howie Mandel,
exactly,
he has to fist bump everybody. He refuses to shake the hands because he's a germaphobe.
Right, but
that's
actually, no, that's not it.
Okay.
Because Howie and other people like him may actually be spending hours in the bathroom washing their hands until they bleed or become raw. They may be spending hours in the shower using a gallon of soap. I've talked to families where they've had to actually get a second hot water tank because someone in their home had OCD and was constantly in the shower. And so if you're in the shower 8 hours a day, you're not going to school, you're not working, you're not having a life. You're basically disabled.
Wow. And there are people like that out there, huh?
Absolutely.
Is it I'm assuming a tiny percentage of Americans, or is there a fairly large segment of Americans that have some obsessive compulsive disorder? It may not be something that's debilitating that affects their lives every day?
Right. It's thought to be about 2%. So 1 in
Really?
50 people are afflicted by
That
this.
stuns me. Seriously?
Absolutely. It's a bigger problem than people think.
To the point where it's debilitating that it affects their daily lives?
Absolutely. Now, not everyone is so disabled that they absolutely can't work, but we do see that in everyone with a diagnosis, there's some sort of impairment at work, school, or relationships, or at home.
What are some of the other things that fall into that category that are mental health issues that are debilitating, that really impact people's lives? I mean, we joke about all the time about, my wife's OCD,
Right.
People joke about that all the time. But what is something that really is a serious mental health issue that perhaps is on the rise in the United States, is really impacting people's lives?
Right. Well, I think major depressive disorder continues to be one of the largest sources of disability worldwide. People, because they feel down or depressed, not able to get out and enjoy their lives, not able to get out and work. We actually lose quite a bit on just something as you think of depression. You don't realize that can actually be quite serious.
But that, a lot of this stuff's come out of the closet. It's been on the cover of Time magazine. People talk about it now, where 30 years ago people wouldn't even talk about depression because it made you a bad person or a less of a person if you had some sort of mental illness. Is it at least getting better that it's out there now, that people talk about it?
Oh, it is getting better, especially with problems like major depressive disorder, where more people are getting help. But you still see a lot of stigma, particularly surrounding thought disorders such as schizophrenia. Even many presentations of OCD are not recognized or appreciated. And there's still a great deal of stigma surrounding addictions.
Is there enough research on these issues?
Absolutely not.
Oh, of course, because you're doing some. Of course there's not, because your research is going to be good on this, right?
Yes.
And what is what do you think, I guess, is the reaction by most Americans that consider themselves normal when they hear somebody's got legitimately depression, OCD, PTSD, something like that? Do you think that most Americans still shun people like that, or do you think they're receptive and try and feel like, that could be me?
I think most people are generally sympathetic, but they don't understand how disabling these conditions are, so they may be likely to give someone advice that isn't helpful, like pull yourself out of it and just suck it up and be tough and be strong. They don't understand that this is maybe no different than having a heart condition or a broken leg. You can't just will yourself to walk around on a broken leg. So when you're depressed, you can't just will yourself out of it.
Okay. All right, Monnica Williams, we appreciate you being on the program. One final note just from you. What would you tell folks if they're feeling trapped, whatever? What would you tell folks? What would you tell them to do?
I would say find a good mental health professional, somebody with a lot of experience who's well qualified to talk to, and find out if your concerns are something that need professional help.
All right. Good luck with your research.
Thank you.
All right. As we always try to do something at the end of each one of these shows, we call it the Did You Know segment, which is a tidbit about the University of Louisville, a little bit of trivia that somebody may not know. So here's the Did You Know segment for today. Did you know that U of L has a top 25 master's program in communications? Did you know that?
I did not know that.
See, and you even work at U of L. So do I. I didn't know that either until I looked it up. So there you go. All right. You can catch me on Monday mornings talking about U of L research students and programs on Great Day Live on WHAS TV with Rachel Platt and Terry Miners. You can hear these shows on the web at soundcloud.com/U of L. And the video of some of these shows is also on Metro TV, which is Louisville's government access channel, each week. I think it airs 5 times a week on Metro TV. And on Thursdays at 5 on KET3. So thank you all for listening to U of L Today with Mark Hebert, and go Cards.